It was March 22nd, 1765, the first time the colonists of the newly founded colonies had heard of the Stamp Act. It was a new tax created by the British Parliament. The new tariff was imposed on all Americans and made them pay extra on everything they needed for everyday life, such as 63 different types of paper, legal documents, licenses, newspapers, playing cards, dice, and even hats. Almost no one agreed with Britain, so they did what any angry country would do. They rebelled. This rebellion led to many other acts regarding taxation, including the Intolerable Acts, the Quartering Act, and one in particular being the Tea Act. This act got the biggest reaction from the people because they didn't accept the constitutionality of the additional tax. So, on May 10, 1773, the trouble began. One of the most popular uprisings against the Tea Act was the Boston Tea Party, but there were multiple revolts that aren't as well known in many other states where they either burned, dumped, or hid tea. Examples of the tea parties that aren't as well known are the Charlestown Tea Parties.
The first Charlestown Tea Party began on December 2nd, 1773, which you might notice is 14 days before the Boston Tea Party on December 16th. Britain's largest source of funding was the British East India Company that sold tea to the colonies. But because of the boycotts happening throughout the province, the company was going bankrupt, harming Britain's economy. So, in October of 1773, the cargo ship London set sail for Charlestown, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia carrying 257 chests of tea. 7 weeks later, Alexander Curling's ship landed on December 2nd. After the ship's arrival, the Liberty Boys posted notices around Charleston inviting all the inhabitants to a meeting in the Great Hall. There, the sense of the people would decide what to do about the tea. On December 22nd, a week after the Boston Tea Party, the colonists asked Curling to return the tea to England, but he refused. The men met again and decided to take matters into their own hands. They said the tea had unconstitutional purposes of raising a revenue up without their consent. At the meeting, the committee tried to prevent the landing of the tea by drafting resolutions. The members of the group included Charles Pinckney, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, and Thomas Ferguson representing the planters, while Gadsden and Daniel Cannon represented the interest of the artisans. The committee hoped to win over the city's merchants, but they were resisting the boycotts. As December went on, Curling began receiving anonymous warnings telling him to move his ship into deeper water or it would be burned. Later, the threats were avoided when the armed royal officers took the tea and locked it away in the Exchange Building and Provost Dungeon without payment to the company. Satisfied with what they had done, the officers allowed the tea to stay in Charlestown under their conditions, but there was still talk of a boycott. Most of the tea was later sold to help with the cost of revolution, and the rest of it remained underneath the warehouse until it was found in the 1900s. During the time in between the two tea parties, Gadsden organized many meetings with his Liberty Boys so they could keep the tea boycotts under control without violence. Then, in June 1774, the South Carolinians heard that the king and Parliament were angered by Boston's response to the tea in their colony. To punish them, they closed Boston's port and placed Massachusetts under strict royal control. When Gadsden heard of the punishments to Boston, he called a 3-day meeting starting July 6th. This meeting gathered over 100 men from across the colony. They reached a compromise when instructions to the delegates were written in a way that satisfied everyone. Henry Middleton, John Rutledge, Gadsden, Thomas Lynch, Edward Rutledge, and Colonel Charles Pinckney were elected to the General Committee, which included 15 merchants and 15 artisans representing Charlestown, along with 69 planters representing the rest of the colony. This General Committee became the temporary government of South Carolina. Following that year, the Second Tea Party began on November 1st, 1774. Not much is known about this party, except this time the ship was called the Britannica and was captained by Samuel Baugh, Jr. of the British East India Company. The South Carolina Gazette stated that the tea was subject to that duty which all America have denied to be constitutionally imposed, and the minds of the people appeared to be very agitated by the 7 chests of tea on board. The tea merchants, inspired by the Boston Tea Party, climbed on board and dumped the tea into the Cooper River. After the tea was destroyed, the bystanders left, as if nothing had happened.
All in all, the Charlestown Tea Parties had many effects on the conflicts of the early United States. This was one of the many rebellions that sparked the Revolution. After Britain heard about the many tea parties happening within the colonies, they imposed even more harsh taxes, angering the people. 2 years after these duties were enacted, the Revolution began. If it wasn't for the Charlestown Tea Parties inspiring those in Boston and the other colonies to rebel, America might still be tied to Britain. In Boston and in Charlestown, they disrespected Britain's acts by taking and dumping their tea without pay. This was an incident of a failed compromise that led to conflict. The failed compromises involved in the tea parties were the taxes enforced by Britain. The taxes were meant to keep the colonies under control, but did the opposite, which leads us to the conflict of the tea being thrown overboard or captured by the angry colonist rebellions. We all wanted no taxation without representation as a growing and great country, our America.
2, 3. Oh, say can